I can beat you, Bret. If you got the guts, step up to the plate.
Professional wrestling has many royal families, and not just one. When you think of royal families in professional wrestling, who do you think of? The McMahons, the Anoa'i, the Rhodes, the Guerreros, and you can't have this conversation without the Hart family. That's why today we'll be talking about Bret and Owen Hart, possibly one of the greatest rivalries in professional wrestling history. Everything was there to make this intense and believable. You had the younger brother Owen Hart, and the older, more mature brother, Bret Hart. Owen always aspired to be Bret. Bret had so many accolades, championships, and talk about him that Owen wanted to grab as well. But it didn't mean that Owen wasn't going to try his best to beat his older brother. That's why we would see this rivalry between Bret and Owen Hart.
Well, enough is enough, and it's time for a change!
Going back in time, we have Stu and Helen Hart, the mother and father of Bret and Owen. Together, they would have 12 children, with Bret being the 8th child in line, and Owen, of course, being the last at 12th. They were a Canadian family who absolutely lived, breathed, ate, and slept the professional wrestling lifestyle. If you ever watched the documentary Wrestling with Shadows, you know exactly what it means to be Stu Hart and to enter his dungeon. Now, Stu's dungeon is where his trainees would train, and this wasn't like any other professional wrestling school, because Stu would make this intense. He would literally take guys, put them into real holds, and make them tap out and regret ever coming to his training camp. Now, Bret and Owen would come out of this camp, and we would also see some other stars come out of here. Some stars you might actually be surprised to hear came out. We had Edge, Christian, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Brian Pillman, Roddy Piper, and one female who would be Natalya Neidhart. So that means any of these people don't ever mess with them because they are hardcore as it gets. Now, Bret would be the first to break into professional wrestling between him and Owen. Bret would pair up with his brother-in-law, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Together, they would make the Hart Foundation. They would hold the championship gold 2 times as a tag team division. And they would be a crucial part in the WWF at that time. Everybody wanted to be Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Bret Hart. So towards the end of their run, WWF would actually try to test the waters with Bret Hart going on a singles run. Bret Hart really had it all this time. He was cool, calm, collected, and when he was in the middle of the ring, he knew how to make someone submit. So they would really push this narrative forward of him being the cool guy, which would bring a lot of younger fans towards his direction, which would give him that huge push. Now, in 1988, Owen Hart would join the WWF. Now, I know a lot of us know that he was pushed as a Blue Blazer towards the end of his career, but he actually came into the WWF as the Blue Blazer in 1988. So this was a different direction for WWF, because usually when a brother, a son, aunt, uncle, mother, father, cousin, blah 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 comes into wrestling, they push him as that person. This person's related to this person. But that's not what they did with Owen. They literally made him the Blue Blazer. Owen would actually jump ship from WWF in 1989, and he would then return 2 years later, after being unable to come to terms with WCW in negotiation talk. Now, by the time Owen came back to WWF, we basically saw Jim the Anvil Neidhart getting phased out, and Bret would start his own singles career. So jumping to 1993, that's when we see everything really come to a head with Bret and Owen Hart. This is where the feud would start. At this time, Bret was fully established as a single star, and Owen was working his way up. And week by week, we would kind of see Owen giving some side eyes to Bret. Yeah, sure, Owen was happy about Bret's accomplishments, but he knew what he wanted to do, and that was what Bret was already doing. And that's why this is such a great feud, because it's literally something any sibling can relate to. And this was actually a great moment for Bret's career, because at the time, WWF was getting cracked down on for steroid use. And Bret really wasn't looking like one of the giant guys out there. Not that Bret wasn't big, not that Bret wasn't strong, but he wasn't the kind of look that really got cracked down on. So it was easy for WWF to really push him in. And at this time, it was super safe to say that Bret was easily the best professional wrestler on the roster, and perhaps of all time. And because of Bret's accolades, because of his in-ring ability, he was the one who was chosen to dethrone Ric Flair in 1992, and Bret would become WWF champion. And this is really where Owen got insanely jealous of Bret. Fast forward to one of the best pay-per-views ever, in that Survivor Series, where we would see the Hart family take on Shawn Michaels and his 3 Knights. Now, the Harts would have control of this match, but what would happen is Bret would suffer an injury. This is because Owen would crash into his brother, which then allowed Shawn Michaels to eliminate him. Now, Bret would win the match for his family, but Owen was visibly shaken up. He would then even challenge Bret to a match, but of course, he'd refuse. He didn't want anything to do with harming his younger brother. So Stu Hart would basically tell Bret and Owen, hey, you guys need to get it together, and they would. Everything would be kosher. In 1994, we'd go to the Royal Rumble, where they would challenge the Quebecers, and this would be for the tag team titles. During the match, Bret would suffer an injury to his knee, and Owen would be begging him to tag him in, like, Bret, tag me, tag me, tag me, and Bret wouldn't do it. And this is where we see Owen just totally pop off. He'd kick his brother's knee, and that was the match. Owen would walk out. And their night wasn't over because then they had to be in the Royal Rumble match. So you can probably see where this is going at this point, and you can see right now as we're talking about this, how good this writing was. You have everything here. You have a family feud, which everyone's pretty much been through. You have older and younger brother. You have family trying to get the older and younger brother back together. You have the older and younger brother trying to work together, but it's not really working out. You have jealousy. Everything's here to make this happen, and everything makes sense. From the start, to the Rumble, to the injuries, it's all just really good writing. Owen would be in the Royal Rumble with Bret, and Owen would get eliminated very quickly. And this is where we see Bret and Lex Luger both winning the Royal Rumble. The only time it's ever happened in Rumble history, mind you. And what happens here? Owen is more mad than ever. And then we go to WrestleMania 10, where Bret and Owen would face off for the first time in a huge WrestleMania match. And Bret would lose this one. Owen would get that upper hand. Finally, Owen was going to the top. Or so all of us thought. And to this day, it's still the perfect telling of a storyline. Now, I know we talk about roll-ups in professional wrestling and how we don't like things to end that way, but that's how this match ended. But the way the story was told here really sold it. Even though, at the end of the day, looking back, Owen might have had that edge on Bret, but in the professional wrestling world of WWF, Bret was the top dog. And there was no way they'd let Owen get it. So it made sense that it would just end in a roll-up. But Bret would wrestle again that night against Yokozuna, and Bret would win the WWF Championship, which was huge because Mr. Fuji cost him that a year previous. And we go to the final shot of the night, which even though Owen had won against his brother, guess what? He's still mad that no matter what he does, no matter if he takes out his brother, he's still not the king of the WWF, because Bret, at the end of the night, still was the champion. And Owen was only left to brag about one match against his brother. Now we go to the King of the Ring tournament, and this is where we see Owen Hart, the King of Hearts. And you can see these little side-eye quips that Owen would make, even in the way he'd sell himself now. The King of Hearts, meaning he is the king of the whole family. And Owen would win this, which would take us to SummerSlam, where it was a steel cage match against his brother. This would be for the WWF Championship, something that Owen wanted so badly. But 12 days before that, it'd be a lumberjack match. And at one point in the match, Owen would be declared the winner. But we'd see a lot of things happen, and Bret would still retain. Now more than ever, just when we thought Owen was already mad, it just keeps getting more and more intense for Owen. So now we're finally at SummerSlam, and this match is one of the greatest matches in wrestling history, if not the greatest match in professional wrestling history. And we would see so much back and forth action. The storytelling in this match was incredible, and I don't think anyone can do it better than Bret and Owen Hart in the ring when they face each other. Unfortunately, everything would still boil over and Bret Hart would retain the title yet again. Owen is just looking weaker and weaker as these weeks go on. And it really kind of sucked because Owen was always a really good professional wrestler. In fact, in my personal list, I would say Owen is top 10 easily professional wrestlers of all time. And if you don't believe me, go watch some of his work in Japan. And although Owen Hart would never really get one up on Bret Hart, this storyline just played into everyone's lives and it just made so much sense. And it showed that no matter what Owen did, because he held on to so much hate against his brother, he could never really get one up because he wasn't the calm and cool collected one. This is what made Bret so special. We talk a lot about Owen Hart in this, but we also have to give some kudos to Bret Hart. There's a reason why Bret is still one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Not only is he a Hart, but just the way he carried himself in the ring and how everything always looks so fluid. Now, Bret would go against Bob Backlund, and the only way to win this match was if someone threw in the white towel. Now, Davey Boy Smith was in Bret's corner, and Owen Hart was in Bob Backlund's corner. And Owen would play a lot of tricks here. He'd go after his brother, then he'd go after Davey Boy Smith. And we would see Bob Backlund hold onto a crossface for just about 10 minutes. Now, in this day and age, that would never fly. That's just too much dead time. But Owen made this very special. Owen would make sure the camera was still very happy with what was going on. And Owen would pretend to look horrified by this. He'd go up to his mom and be like, "Mom, throw in the towel, throw in the towel, throw in the towel." Owen was playing so many tricks here that it was just incredible. And when we look at the history of Owen Hart, not only was he incredible in the ring, but just his character drive was just incredible. Stu wouldn't give in to Owen, but his mom would. And they'd throw in the towel. This would cost Bret the WWF Championship against Bob Backlund. Now, Bob Backlund didn't really hold this title for way too long. He held it for 3 days, and Diesel would take it from him. And it only took Diesel 8 seconds to beat Bob. Diesel would offer a title opportunity to Bret, and their match would be declared a draw. as Shawn Michaels, Bob Backlund, and of course Owen Hart would interfere in the match. And then weeks later, we would see Bret defeat Owen Hart, which seemingly ended the feud. There was really nothing else that Owen could do at this point. And then as the years went by, there really wasn't much that was going on between the brothers. Of course, we know the Montreal Screwjob came about. We knew that the WCW jump was already on the horizon for Bret. And so we'd really see WWE let this all fizzle out and just kind of come to a close. But we would see Owen start to team up with Davey Boy Smith as Bret still went on his singles run. The potential of this storyline was totally there, but at the end, it kind of fell flat. And then it just came to a point where Owen just couldn't get anywhere. And there's been so many great family feuds in professional wrestling history, but nothing ever really topped this one. Bret versus Owen. Owen versus Bret. The younger brother versus the older brother. Nothing has come close to this day. And that's why, in my opinion, when it comes to family feuds, this was the top. This was the epitome of professional wrestling in family feuds. And for some reason, one or the other, they never truly gave Owen the shot. In my opinion, when it comes to this feud, again, Owen should have held the title at least once for a few weeks. Sure, you can talk about the accolades of him beating Bret once, you can talk about him creating the new Hart Foundation, and you can also talk about him winning King of the Ring, but he just always deserved better. If time went on, if Owen was given more time on this earth, could he have surpassed his brother Bret Hart? Unfortunately, I guess we'll never know, and that's a conversation we can have in the comments.